Good morning, good morning. All right, or good afternoon for whoever is watching this later on. So as I get up, okay, I gotta make sure I have my chat up because last time people were like actually commenting and I was completely missing it. That's a true representation of attention deficit disorder sometimes. But again, so welcome back. If this is the first time watching me talk into the abyss, or it's the second, just to reintroduce myself, I am Sara Wilder. As you guys, so on Facebook, y'all see the little nameplate. On Instagram, which of course I didn't start before I started talking. You don't see it, but on YouTube, everything gets streamed to YouTube. So if you want to catch up on other previous components of what I talk about, go over to my YouTube, like, subscribe, whatever you feel up to doing. And yeah, I welcome back to another episode of How to Align with Transformation. So today is going to be I think it's technically part 3, because last live I did was part 2, unpacking and exploring attention deficit disorder and the different kind of components of little things that go into the recovery from attention deficit disorder. And today specifically, we're going to be talking about time. And so this is not just attention deficit disorder, honestly. This really goes into, so my experience, I've worked across an array of settings. I've worked in inpatient settings. I've worked in residential. I've worked in, which they are actually 2 different things. Worked in the correctional system. I've worked in outpatient. I've worked in a lot of different types of settings, doing diagnostics, treatment, all the things. And why I just focus on recovery now is because, well, if you haven't looked around, there's a lot of stuff going on. Our ability to deal with stress and cope with stress, we all have different levels with it. And therapy, I really want people to understand what therapy is. It's not the same thing for everyone. And to notice the generalizations of when and the stigmas that go around people's own experiences with therapy and how that taints really what you can even do to live your life in a less stressful way, right? So if you want to call it life coaching, but I've gained a lot of clinical experience, and attention deficit disorder, anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, even schizoaffective, and all, you go up the line to the more severe and persistent mental illnesses. We're lacking a core couple of things, and the relationship with time is one of those things. And I think it's really important because when I work with my clients in therapy, or even just group therapy is different than individual therapy, obviously, but different approaches, stuff like that. But the relationship with time is really one of the centerpieces of any diagnosis that you're dealing with. And this is where I got to stay focused with my own attention deficit disorder, because it's like when you're under an immense amount of stress for so long, the brain starts to do what it needs to do to help you. So if you watch part 1 and part 2 of exploring attention deficit disorder, we talked a little bit about the influence of stress and adverse childhood experiences, neglect, trauma, whatever the case may be. And then there's the general understanding of what stress is, and then keeping up with development. But to be honest with you, all of us are underdeveloped in some way. And attention deficit disorder just tends to be the label that we put, we being the medical community, the mental health, behavioral health community, counseling, whatever. We put that label to start paying attention to what are the deficits? What are the skills? Communication skills is a huge part of that. But we all have deficits, because guess what? No parent is perfect. And on top of that, no growing up, no development process is going to be perfect. There's a lot of external variables. There's a lot of internal variables that go into brain development and just overall life experience. I never thought I would be the one talking about this, honestly, but that's the thing, is like my life experience of getting to a point where I was like, oh, my life is becoming unmanageable. I'm getting attention deficit, late onset adult diagnosis, binge eating disorder, major depressive disorder, even upwards of seeing my own borderline personality disorder traits, because we all got them, that I was like, oh, maybe I need to do some work here. So with that little premise and intro, I want to just specifically focus on the relationship with time. Not only like, why is this such a common thing with attention deficit disorders or any just kind of human experience, but then also, what do you do about it? Because that was my biggest crux of like being a provider as well as being a patient, is that I have been told all my life that it was, you need to lose weight. You need to get, do things. You need to just do this one thing and it will help. And they weren't wrong, but no one really told me how to do it. So that is why my brand or my podcast is How to Align with Transformation, is honesty, openness, and willingness. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be open enough to consider that there's something outside of yourself that you may be missing. And it's not usually the things that you're already trying to obtain. And you have to have the willingness to know the difference of what it is that you need versus what it is that you want. As one example. So let's get into the relationship specifically with time when it comes to. So I think one of the more common things that is whether it's being talked about on social media or is just being experienced in general, is time blindness. Now, this is a tricky thing. And really what that means is that a lot of the times it usually stems from dissociation. So our brain ultimately kind of goes on break without our consent, and we disassociate, and time becomes something that we do not conceptualize and or manage in a pretty productive way. Actually, I don't even want to use the word productive, in a reasonable way. And then the longer that we don't have that ability to conceptualize time, which is already a social construct as it is. So I get it. We can rationalize it all day. It does not have to be rigid military, like time. No reference to the actual military there. But it can be flexible. But when you're learning to recover from attention deficit disorder and learning to build that lifestyle of what has to go into certain decision making to be able to prevent some of the overwhelm that comes with time blindness, it's important that we do have some structure and rigidity, two different things, but we have some structure around time. So before I go into what you do about it, though, is like, why does this happen? Why does time blindness happen? And it happens for a multitude of reasons, and every person has a different experience with it. My clients, I hear an array of people who they had a late parent, so they never really learned what time was, or they had a late parent and they became the kind of the little parent of having to create an structure for themselves. So they become very rigid with time. And that can also have kind of a counterproductive outcome with time blindness, is because you can have such an attachment and a control with time that you have time blindness in other areas that actually cause more consequence, usually in your social life, in your psychosocial development, or really your emotional development too, because if you're putting that much energy towards, I gotta be on time, I gotta do it, rigid, right? Then you're likely really tired by the end of the day. You're likely not going to feel emotionally secure majority of the time. So when we talk about, if I come from this through an attachment theory lens, if I work, some of my clients speak in different languages, not like some of them do actually, literally speak in different languages, but I counsel in English, but I speak through different lenses of theory for my clients, because some people don't understand psychosocial development. That's not their thing. Some people want and understand attachments more. Some people understand, I'm a transactional analysis is, that's in my program. I can't really break it down, but that's a different model. Some people like CBT, some people like DBT. I have to speak through theories to help people understand, okay, what are you attached to? And a lot of times people are attached to an experience that influences the time blindness. And it's usually a relationship with time where they have become either over controlling or under controlling with their time. So, and then time has either been linked to their anxious responses. And so we kind of have to reprogram the anxiety in order to understand the skill to work on time management, to time budgeting, stuff like that. So an important part, and so I'm going to kind of midway point of what do you do about it, kind of a midway bridge here is the acronym HALT, HALT. And so this is actually becoming more, where I learned it was from the recovery community. But it's becoming more of a generalized coaching acronym to just help with overall lifetime management is HALT, because it gives you we all have that association with a stop sign. If we say HALT, we're stopping, right? So, but this acronym is actually HALLT. When I first learned it was just HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I actually learned recently at a conference watching another educator include the second T, and I was like, oh, that makes so much freaking sense, because I talk about this all the time. We need to include the second L, which is hungry, angry, lonely, late, and tired. So what this is that when you say like HALT, when you feel out of control, unmanageable, reactive, or implosive, HALT. Doing a quick inventory. These are the 5 states of stress in terms of our micro stressors. Not necessarily microaggressions, but micro stressors. Hungry, angry, lonely, late, and tired. So when you're in that state of reactivity or that overstimulation, HALT is a good way to be like, okay, pause, inventory, let me see what's going on, and that can be influencing my decision-making in this particular situation. So when we're talking about time blindness, and this is like where a lot of people get reactive or underreactive, because a lot of times it comes from like usually end of the day, or they're completely overwhelmed, stuff like that. Excuse me, I distracted myself. That hungry, angry, lonely, tired is a way to kind of get your brain back in line and thinking like, okay, what do I need? So not only is it an inventory, but I love its duplicity is that it is a checklist to be like, okay, when is the last time that I had a snack? Food is fuel. Now, if you have an unhealthy relationship with food, then you can go over and we can talk about involving in my program, learning about that, because sometimes we overuse fuel when we're lacking in the other areas of angry, lonely, late, and tired. But for this particular talk, generally speaking, having a check-in point of like, when was the last time I had a snack? When was the last time I had any fuel intake? Because that's going to help your ability to understand and conceptualize, okay, time has nothing to do with the middle of the day and when it's time to eat a meal. It has everything to do with just your brain is dissociating because it is overworked, under-fueled. And hunger is a cue that tends to get shut down first and foremost when our brain becomes overstressed. So, angry. This is a big one or a little one for some people. For me, it's actually quite little, but it's also big in its magnitude of like, this is the one that I overlook the most. Anger has been an emotion that I've personally repressed. Not everyone else represses it, but I'm a loving, compassionate, caring person. What business do I have being angry? What? So I actually had to relearn this because my attention deficit disorder ultimately formed out of caring for everyone else before caring for myself, right? So anger became something that I didn't really actually register. And then I would default back to eating because that was my body and my brain's way of like, ooh, just get pleasure, get something to get back online, cognitively. So anger is something that now we have to associate with time that can cause time blindness, that can cause our minds to dissociate, because anger is a big emotion. For me, it was big, and then it was like, nope, she's not going to deal with that because she got other stuff to deal with that I've mentally prioritized over my own self, right? So the HALT, the A in HALT is anger. That's something in itself that you can explore. Just this one acronym, honestly, you could do your own therapy session and explore your relationship with each one, because that will actually tell you a lot about your relationship with time and which of these states of stress maybe impacts your time the most, stuff like that. So the first L is lonely. This is another one that, surprisingly, as introverted as I can be, as good on my own as I am, I still struggle with sometimes. That if I'm having a reaction to something, that a lot of times I have to consider, is it loneliness? Am I wanting someone to see me, to invite me somewhere versus me doing the facilitating? I'm a facilitator. That's my maladaptive, but actually pretty good coping skill because it's my profession. But I have to acknowledge the fact that comes out of my own traumas and my own experiences and my own losses. That makes me good at what I do, but I can't be a therapist all the time. I can't be on all the time. And so how that when I'm off, quote unquote, mentally, like, and I've had to practice this a lot, is that when I'm in my personal life, when I am really just needing to be Sara, is loneliness something that I struggle with? Because honestly, yeah, I still am. There's times where a lot of people see me, and I've contributed to building this way, that people see me as I'm good. I'm okay. I'm the therapist that takes care of everyone else. She's changed her life. Oh, great. She doesn't need someone to check in on her. I guess this is my little micro PSA of like, you know what? Check on your strong friends. Check on the therapist. Are they doing okay? Because some therapists, yeah, we are in this profession because we've gone through immense impact in our lives. We've had stuff happen to us. Just because we know how to be okay and we can teach other people to learn how to be okay does not mean that we don't want to be checked in on. We really do appreciate not only just the effort for you to be like, yeah, what's up? How you doing? Even if you don't hold the space for us, that's fine. We usually the therapists have other outlets, and they have friends that are therapists that can hold the space, or we've encouraged our friends to be like, just let me ban it out. I know what I need, like all that. But not every therapist is like that, honestly. I'm not going to say all therapists are hiding something, but I know I've been pretty good at hiding something in my life. So yeah, loneliness is a big one. So if we talk about the general public, we're in a loneliness epidemic. So honestly, you should be checking this box at this point. And that was even before COVID. And since COVID, I've watched people isolate more. I've watched them protect their peace. And the natural consequence of that is going to have more unmet social needs. Doesn't mean that they're not doing anything, but our exposure to socialization has significantly changed since COVID. There's a lot more increasing rates of social anxiety. There are just more things to consider these days when it comes to mental health than just self-care. So loneliness is a big one. I will talk about what do you do. I'll share a graphic too for you guys to download in the captions here, just to have, for consideration. And if you need help with the prompt of like, what do you do? So that loneliness and addressing like, what do you do about it could look like sending a text message to a friend and be like, yo, you got a minute? How are you doing? Sometimes when we just go facilitate asking someone else how they're doing, we actually get what we need, which is someone to recognize us. Now, there's a lot of speculation like, oh, you should just be able to say, I need to talk, I'm having a tough time. That's just not as socially acceptable. You can do that, absolutely. But just being like, hey, I need to talk, I'm having a tough moment right now. Sometimes not everyone's available. And sometimes not everyone's emotionally available for that. That's another conversation for another time. But then there's also, I encourage all my clients, it's a balance. I usually give you have to have a minimum of 3 different plans. You have to have the one that is dependent on someone else or something outside of yourself. You have to have the one that is in the middle, of some dependent on someone outside of yourself as well as you. So that's like that text message of like, hey, how are you doing? In order to get someone to naturally kind of respond. And then you've got the one that's completely interdependent. Journaling is usually a good representation of this, is that like, okay, if I'm lonely, if I'm going through something, I know that I can sit down and I can face it on paper and I'm going to be okay. And I will be able to build a tolerance to that particular emotion over time. Okay. Or that experience. I keep saying emotion. Loneliness is not really emotion. It's just kind of an experience of a lot of different emotions sometimes. So late, when we talk about time, is if you are chronically late. Now, I give my people and my clients a lot of flexibility with this. And when I say a lot, I mean 7 minutes. If you're one of my clients, if you are running behind for a session, absolutely fine. But I set my standard as like, please communicate with me if you're going to be more than 5 minutes late. And because after 5 minutes, I'm going to send a text and be like, hey, are we still good for today? So COVID in real life, when I was going, like it affected my time because we had to switch being living from home and then also considering traffic. Whereas before COVID, I was good with traffic. I knew how to time budget in my mind of when to leave, how to get how and be on time. So I had to re-practice this in the past few years of now reintegrating back into the community, since I do a lot more community work now and not just talk to the screen all day, that my time blindness needs to come. Like, I need to actually budget a little bit more time, because how I tell myself my speed will also dictate my time. So this is also a stressor for some people. Let me slow down for a moment. Y'all taking notes. I'm talking too fast, right? Late also means if you're running late, if you were like, oh shit, I gotta get to work, I'm gonna be 5 minutes late, and you stop at Starbucks, because that's not discriminatory of the fact that you are late, you have triggered yourself ultimately. And this is a time for you to stop, slow down, halt, check in with yourself, because that in itself, you've now just rationalized, oh, well, I'm already late, so I might as well go enjoy a coffee. No shade, but I've done it before myself. But don't underestimate the fact that you also now still have an association with that lateness that is and can trigger a stress response. So I always recommend people, it's like, if you're running late, you're late, own it, cool, but also regulate. Also make sure that you're breathing and talking to yourself and in recovery to make sure that you're not just minimizing the impact of how this actually does make you feel about yourself. And I say that specifically because this is all associations that usually are tied to having low self-esteem, low self-worth. You may own it because, like, oh, that's just who I am. I'm just going to be 5 minutes late to things. Except it does actually reinforce a larger reactivity issue, usually about yourself. I usually can, with my clients who are like, oh, no, I'm late. They're never late to my sessions. They're usually just late to everyone else, because I've communicated my expectation of like, okay, therapy, we're working on this. But in their other areas of their life, do they actually start to ruminate about like, oh my gosh, what do people think about me? And it could be easy to say like, oh, you shouldn't care what people think about you. It's not a mental health conversation that I have. I actually encourage consideration and perspective, because it's literally how you see yourself. People's opinion of you is going to influence your opinion of you. So if you are not considerate to the perspective of other people say about you, then you're not actually considering how you think about you. And that's going to be just a big barrier, not only of time blindness, because of how much time it has taken to consider what I want my life to look like. What do I say about myself? Because I had to do an overhaul on my belief system. I had to do an overhaul on what is Sara capable of? What am I worth? This was all wrapped up just in time, because it takes time to understand yourself. It takes time to recover. So that's the second L. Lateness. If you are rushing, even if you're not rushing, consider how lateness shows up in your life. And then the last time is tired. Hungry, angry, lonely, late, and tired. If you are one of these 5 things, stop, halt, check in, and either place an action towards the things that you can identify, but tired being that maybe you do need a rest. Now, rest is not always the same thing as sleep. Fatigue can also sometimes mask itself as the hunger as well. So if you if you check off both hungry and tired, try to have a small snack and then see whether or not the nap it's still probably going to be needed, just because you're like at a deficit. But this is also taking into account, like, maybe you need to start looking at your sleep. If you're struggling with sleep issues, you can go to my website, not even just the app, but just my website. And I have a sleep hygiene routine laid out for you guys at the top of my website. It's at the very, very top. And just one thing of self-care, sleep hygiene. You assessing that, maybe going to bed 10 minutes early, putting a timer on your screen timer on your phone. I got totally called out last night I was scrolling and some random person I don't even follow was like, go to bed. And I was like, yes, ma'am. So you have to start potentially putting those things in places yourself. And I have a sleep timer on. My do not disturb goes on at 9:30. And that's supposed to recognize my brain to go stretch, do a little bit of journaling, sit in my sound bath. And I've been a little bit off that routine lately, but that's okay. But that is also the sleep hygiene routine is where I started my life transformation. I focus on sleep because I was restless during my sleep. My cortisol levels were high, so therefore I started sweating a lot at night, and that was just uncomfortable. Even though I shower every day and every morning, waking up with like dampness, you got to wash your sheets more. It just became overwhelming in itself, right? And that's what I started paying attention to when I was like, okay, how do I like how I enter the day? I don't like it. So I realized how I entered the day is how I end the day. So because I was going to sleep with my phone in my hand, scrolling, crashing was another one. Not like this, but like just being so fatigued that I just knock out. That actually is a component to a lack of quality of sleep, because your mind and your body are not able to really decompress and be able to not like enter into a subconscious state where all of the brainwashing, in a good way, the brain hygiene replenishes itself, our hormones balance. This is essential for women, especially around the fact that we have a cycle we can't control, and our body is just kind of doing whatever. Hormone regulation from and I don't mean supplemental or birth control, I just mean from a behavioral standpoint, is essential, because there's some things that you're just not going to be able to change. So no, this sleep hygiene routine is very important. So if you guys need that as a resource, it's on my website. So tired. Yeah. So HALT is like what you can do about it. It's just one thing. This kind of does stem off of the other, now the in part 2, I believe, where I made the acronym FINE, as is, why is this happening? Again, it's your personal experiences. If you have people, so another thing that you can do about it, and this becomes, it's a little bit more higher level, is when we start talking about boundaries. And time boundaries are probably one of the more difficult boundaries to kind of acclimate to, because a lot of times when I'm having this conversation with people, they're past the point of, it's not no return, what's the word I want to use? They're past the point of where time budgeting doesn't make them anxious. It's going to make people anxious to take a look at putting structure in your life and putting boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are blueprints. They are lines in the sand, whatever metaphor, visual you want to use, is that time boundaries are how your brain starts to conceptualize time. So I encourage everyone to start with paper, but because it's 2024 and we are in a technological society and AI is just doing everything for us, I don't encourage people to start with an AI powered calendar, but you can start with a Google Calendar. And how you start time blocking is how my first suggestion of how you reinforce time boundaries. Now, another area of time boundaries too comes to, one, how do you respect your own time? So that will come with setting the time blocking. But then how do you reinforce other people respecting your time? And so when I work for myself, it's a little bit easier in some regard for me, not all, but in some regard where I have had clients want to talk, and I could say, oh, my client was talking over, they made me go over. They didn't make me go over. I did not set a time boundary early enough to know that I'm like, okay, I have to go. Even if I don't have a session right after that, I may, like, this is often in my lunch break. I've now put effectively an hour break in between 2 or 3 sessions, because I know that I'm going to get hungry and I'm going to become less effective. That if I go over that time boundary of my 3rd session, that's my personal time being decreased. So we have to consider, like, who are the people that tend to overstep our time boundaries, because that relationship with time now becomes a situation of conflict resolution. And I know that seems an extreme thing to jump to, but it's not, because I think there's an association with conflict that kind of sets a stigma to the word that it's really just a different vantage point. You've got one person going this direction, you got one person going that direction. There needs to be a resolve, because we're going to run into each other. Okay. So how we are able to communicate. So this is where time becomes now not only a life skill for time budgeting, but it now becomes a communication skill. How do you have an uncomfortable conversation when you have to tell someone, yo, I need some space? Like, and this is where I have another acronym for this in my program is the VEER model. Validate, explain, redirect, and exit. Is you have to be like, yo, you know what? I absolutely have enjoyed talking with you right now, but I have some important things that I just need to be by myself to think about. So I'll get up with you later. Redirect, exit is shut up. And that has come from honestly years of having to tell people things that I hate to tell people, whether it be the truth or just something difficult that I know is going to be hard for them to consider. But is that now we have to consider where our relationship with time starts to bleed into the other things that we just need to fine tune. And communication is a big one. When we're talking about mental health, and what I help people understand is not only how to communicate effectively about how, what their experience is, but then how to receive communication of other people's experiences. And some of those experiences are, I would say, and I have to say with bias, because I don't usually talk to the other person communicating towards them, is that they're aggressive. They're abusive. There are abusive people and aggressive people. And I have contributed minorly, that's probably my own self-judgment, but I've contributed to being an aggressive communicator. I have influenced, and I've had moments of where I was not conscious of someone else's insecurity, or I wasn't thinking of my impact, where I've said things that triggered someone else's abusive past. And that's something that I have to live with. Thankfully, I've worked on my relationship with guilt. So it's like we never really know. There's no perfect outcome, but you can make progress. If you're going to make a mistake, that you have to consider, how do you build those skills around the experiences and not overcorrect those skills? Because there's sometimes where it's like I've had an experience where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can never do that again. And I didn't really do anything wrong, because I was actually experiencing more of someone else's reaction and not considering my own. And that reaction, not that it's invalid, but it may have not been a actual reasonable reaction for me to change my behavior for. So this is where you have to get some perspective, right? Is like, and try to be unbiased about that. So as I wrap up here, so we've talked about HALT, we've talked about the VEER model that helps with effective communication of your time boundaries. We've talked about why our time boundaries and time blindness have happened. Then let's talk about some maybe what else you can do to practice improving your relationship with time, because some of these are talked about, I think, in general other areas of life, but maybe not. So I've talked about time budgeting already. The second one is an actual technique that you can Google. It's called the Pomodoro technique. And this is based off of, honestly, a cooking technique, so that you set a timer to check. So in an Italian kitchen, there you have these little tomatoes. So Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. And you have to stir the sauce. You got to leave it on a low boil, but you got to stir it so it doesn't burn to the bottom, right? So the way that Pomodoro is used is that it's now becoming a workflow. It integrates into your workflow. Whereas if you have ADHD or attention deficit disorder, even spectrum disorders, time is an issue for you. And focus and procrastination are an issue for you. Pomodoro technique can be a good training for your brain to be like, okay, focus 15 minutes, small break. Focus 15 minutes, small break. Focus 15 minutes, bigger break. And that's where your brain will start to be able to kind of exercise itself and to kind of decrease the unpreferred dopamine overhaul and all that stuff. And I would not recommend taking your breaks on a screen, especially if you work on a screen. But if you're using the Pomodoro technique, use the timer on your computer, so then that way you're there. You can use it on your phone, but honestly, it's just a separate screen. But I would encourage the short breaks to be either a body break, so stretching, or it could be a pet break. So if you have an animal and you work from home, you can go pet your dog, you can play with a cat, whatever the case may be. Or get outside and get real light. Not that you can see this, or I guess you can see one. I'm surrounded by lights all the time. Fluorescent lights, not the screen lights. If you follow me on my stories at all, you'll see me take my little breaks in my hammock. My hammock's out on my patio. I go get real light because the blue light, yes, it's a thing. It's not that much of a thing though. It's not. Looking at a screen and looking at fluorescent lights is a thing. So we need natural UV light versus synthetic light. And that's going to help the brain regulate how it uses energy and responds to you, because we're not just inside, either in the dark or just using synthetic light that is mimicking real light, but we need actually real sunlight. It's a very different type of light. So Pomodoro technique is one way to reestablish your relationship with time. And then, of course, mindfulness. So this kind of goes, it can integrate with the Pomodoro technique, and that could be a breathing break. It could be a that's the stretching, is it's more of a mindful moment. But a lot of time mindfulness is really about practicing not attaching to your thoughts. So if you find yourself in a time blind situation or a dissociation, this is where mindfulness, it can be very challenging, because a lot of times you don't feel like you can actually get your brain back online. But you can practice that breathing, that diaphragmatic breathing, that thought awareness, because usually in dissociation, we are actually in an active rumination, but it's going so fast that I call it the bicycle effect, the bicycle wheel effect, where the wheel is going so fast that you can't even see the spokes. It just looks like one big circle. And that's ultimately what rumination looks like. And so you can throw something through the bicycle wheel and kick it right back out. So you're actually thinking. So the mindfulness will help you slow down that bicycle wheel. And then you can maybe able to use journaling to be like, okay, make a list of like what's on your brain, because sometimes it's just like going over and over and over again, because you may be strong intellectually. And intellectualization is usually a high intellect problem, is that we try to make sense of our emotional state versus actually experience our emotional state. So that's kind of my own limit to how much I'm going to talk about the relationship with time, just because that's a lot of information. And you may have even dissociated listening to it. I don't freaking know. But when we talk about, okay, what do you do in time blindness? Halt. You can be like a little wizard with it since it's October. Halt. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I late? Am I tired? Breathe. When you halt, you got to breathe. Can you do anything? Can you have a snack? Do you need to express yourself? Do you need to punch a pillow? Please don't punch a wall or punch anyone else. That provides negative consequence. Are you lonely? Do you need a connection with yourself and or with someone else? Do you need to slow down and late or communicate that you're going to be late to someone? Are you tired? Do you need to rest your eyes or take like a 15-minute little rest or a guided meditation, something to recharge? That is a good self-inventory to help the relationship with time and time blindness, if that's the case. Practicing time budgeting. If you need any help, I do short, brief consultations if you want to do certain skill building. So let me know, DM me, and we can figure out a time to just kind of go through. Or I've just got a whole bunch of free resources in my app. I have a couple of templates for helping with daily time blocking and weekly time blocking. Just a quick tip, because it's on my mind. Do not plan out a little bit, but when it comes to daily and weekly, only plan 2 to 3 days at a time, especially if you struggle with attention deficit disorder, because one, you're going to piss yourself off by trying to plan the whole week when the week is probably going to go to shit anyway. And you are likely going to not be in control of exactly how that time budgeting goes. So that's a good opportunity to practice flexibility with yourself and compassion versus criticism. So, and then, slow down. Like even in little ways throughout your life. When you're driving, go like 2 miles per hour slower than you're used to. When you're washing dishes, slow down. When you're walking through the house, slow down. You don't have to freeze. You don't have to do that. But that's how you can regulate your nervous system. That's how you can retrain your mind to start understanding time. we move quicker because time is a perception of how we feel, and ultimately how our actions get reinforced how we feel. So when you're starting to recorrect your relationship with time, this is where your behaviors become the brace. You have to start the catch it before the action's initiated, or if the action is initiated, then you have to start curbing that away to be like, okay, it's better than nothing. Something's better than nothing is a big motto in my coaching program. So that's what I got for y'all smart people today, because if you're dealing with a mental health issue, it's because you're intelligent. It's almost too smart for your own good. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But yeah, I will see you guys in another couple weeks. Maybe there'll be a part 4. There's a lot of different relationships. Relationship with time generally is a huge common topic that I have with people regardless of diagnosis. So there's another couple, like relationship with money, relationship with loss, relationship with themselves in general, relationship with emotions, and that can be a whole thing. But if you can go through those main categories for yourself, honestly, I don't need to see you in therapy. If you can do the work yourself, but you may need some support, so let me know. And if you guys are interested, not only my YouTube, go over there and check that out, but then also if you do need a self-guided program where I've laid this out in coursework as well as assigned worksheets, let me know, because that is a very manageable program and I have spots open for it. So I hope you guys enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. It's October 4th, and I have a Halloween party. I got an early one, Spooky Step. Shout out to Brittany. I'm excited to be around and see her and do some step, because it's been ever since I moved. I got my step underneath I think it's in my trunk actually. Got my step in my trunk, and I cannot, I'm excited. I'm excited to get some movement in. So enjoy the rest of your weekend.